The 1960s in America was a time of change and expression. It seemed that everyone was striving for some form of change, whether it was political, social, or even cultural change. The creation and resurgence of some products also came around in the 60s, some going as far as becoming American classics. Innovations in music were also important, with its highlight being the creation of funk music. Various artists found popularity and became American icons, as their lyrical decisions played a role in inspiring social reform. Presidents and activists fought for civil rights and equality in America, mostly finding success in eliminating the nation's racist attitudes.
There were large groups fighting for civil rights during the 1960s as racism was prominent in America. Activists like Martin Luther King Jr. rose to power as an advocate of equality in the nation, and his name is now rightfully well known. His famous I Have a Dream speech delivered at the March on Washington on August 28, 1963, is remembered as one of the most iconic speeches ever given in American history. The presidency of John F. Kennedy illustrated his belief in civil rights, as well as his attempted support for the black communities of the nation. Although he did not live long enough to see the change be made, he paved the way for the president after him, President Lyndon B. Johnson, to pass laws that would change African American lives forever. Malcolm X is also remembered for his efforts to end racial inequality in America during the 1960s. All of these people's efforts, among many others, have gone down in history as a civil rights movement, as they brought change to America with protests and sit-ins, which eventually led to the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Today, we are seeing history repeat itself with the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. The fight to end racism-induced police brutality in America today shows many similarities with the civil rights movement that fought against public segregation. Both movements work towards racial equality and seek justice for those who have fallen victim to the despicable acts of racism.
The creation of the hippie culture also came around, finding its place through its unique ideals. With a plethora of bright and psychedelic colors, the hippies advocated for peace across the nation. For example, at the time of the Vietnam War, they protested against it. The people preferred a peaceful position in the war, believing that the nation could yield results through nonviolent means. The hippies' social reform ideologies found large numbers of supporters that each emphasized their idea of free expression through their attire. Each expressed his or her individuality and optimism through long hair and their iconic phrase, flower power. Like most groups, they found opposition from others who claimed that their optimism was misplaced and that they really didn't know how the world worked, but this didn't stop them.
But the biggest problem is your hair groomed, and what's it like under your arms, and do you have bad breath? And this is the American obsession. And so I think that a generation of kids which says,
inspired by the hippie culture at the time, women's masculinity also became a second type of social reform. Women too embraced the bright tie-dye colors as they began wearing shorter skirts, and the invention of the pantyhose freed them from the burdens of wearing girdles and garter belts. Hairstyles were also made more flamboyant and expressive, ultimately allowing women to deviate from the traditional female attire in favor of a more personalized wardrobe. Notable artists like Aretha Franklin and James Brown also contributed to the social reform in the 60s. Franklin sang about equality and fair treatment of others, especially regarding the relationships between husbands and wives. Her most popular song, Respect, exemplifies this idea through the lyric, she was an inspiration to women in the black communities of America and was nicknamed the Queen of Soul. James Brown was an R&B artist in the group called The Flames. The rhythmic tension of their 1965 song, Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, created a new style of music, funk. Brown also urged black children not to neglect school in his song, Don't Be a Dropout. The Beatles and Elvis Presley also found their role in American pop culture, this time through rock and roll music. Despite being originally from England, the Beatles toured across America performing to massive audiences, with their first televised performance having over 74 million American viewers. In 1965, the group became the first to play in a stadium with an audience of over 55,000. Songs like I Wanna Hold Your Hand and Twist and Shout left an unforgettable impression on American rock and roll. Elvis Presley was a retired soldier who signed with RCA Records and began releasing music. He became the king of rock and roll while also starring in multiple films. His reach to American audiences was monumental, with songs like Can't Help Falling in Love and It's Now or Never becoming American classics.
During the 1960s, one of the most notable presidents of the United States who held office was President John F. Kennedy. Though he only served for 2 years, the impression he and his wife, First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy, left on America is unmatchable. As the 35th president, he implemented public works projects in order to bring down unemployment rates. This helped millions of people in America to earn jobs and boost the economy. Additionally, Kennedy made way for President Lyndon B. Johnson to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968, all of which granted African Americans the abolishment of public segregation, the right to vote, and the elimination of being racially or religiously discriminated against when dealing with housing opportunities. First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy advocated for the preservation of the White House by adding valuable works of art and furniture to its rooms and holding gatherings for people involved in the arts, including musicians and painters. Her contributions to America by working to keep the beauty of the White House was recognized through her winning of an honorary Emmy. Jacqueline valued different cultures and the arts, which led to her establishment of the White House Fine Arts Committee. The Kennedy era was brought to an end in 1963 when President Kennedy was assassinated, and today it is remembered as one of America's most unfortunate tragedies.
The introduction of certain foods may have seemed like little things during the time, but they soon became staples in the American market. The creation of the well-known Dorito snack came around in the 60s. First commercially sold in 1964, Doritos were simple corn tortilla chips sold by the Frito-Lay company. These crunchy snacks found popularity across the nation, but it wasn't until 3 years later, in 1967, that a new flavor was introduced. Taco flavor was the second type of Dorito that was sold, which easily found its way into American homes. Now, Doritos is a staple of worldwide junk food, accumulating over 100 different flavors that span across different regions, ranging from the classic nacho cheese to the peculiar roasted turkey. Although originally invented many years prior, pineapple upside-down cake found a resurgence in popularity during the 1960s. When Dole's canned pineapple began selling in small rounds, people's cravings for this cake increased dramatically. It was a simple cake baked with pineapple slices at the bottom of the pan, so when the cake was cooled and turned over, the slices would remain pleasantly on the surface. Pineapples were seen as symbols of hospitality and friendship, which made them perfect to take to parties or to welcome a new neighbor. Today, this type of cake is made everywhere, with the introduction of maraschino cherries adding a heterogeneous flavor. SpaghettiOs were a third advent to the American diet, sold by Campbell's Franco-American brand. They were created to aid busy mothers in getting a meal on the table as quickly as possible, as more and more women were being employed due to economic necessity. SpaghettiOs were a simple pasta and tomato sauce canned dish mostly directed at children. Their popularity allowed them to remain in the market to this day.
The 1960s brought America monumental cultural, social, and political change. With the introduction of new music, foods, fashion trends, and social reform, 1960s America has been defined with all of these different changes. Musical artists including Aretha Franklin, Elvis Presley, James Brown, and the Beatles began a new era of music with their contributions to the creation of the funk and rock and roll genres. Each one of them have become a household name. The 1960s inventions of now classic foods and snacks, including Doritos, SpaghettiOs, and pineapple upside-down cake, were revolutionary and never seen before, and are still enjoyed by Americans today. Also, the emergence of hippie culture and the resurgence of polka dots greatly defined the 1960s fashion. The presidency of John F. Kennedy and the civil rights movement that followed his time as President of the United States brought drastic change to the nation. The fight put up by activists influenced the passing of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and the Fair Housing Act, all during the 1960s. Today, the Black Lives Matter movement shows similarities with the Civil Rights Movement. Both movements are symbolic of the racism that was and is still present in America, and the extent that people would fight to get rid of it. The Black Lives Matter movement was started in response to police brutality, much like how the Civil Rights Movement was ignited against segregation laws.